She was a 22-year-old waitress, drowning in debt and forgotten dreams, serving coffee in a greasy spoon diner. He was a reclusive millionaire, a man who could buy anything in the world, but happiness haunted by a ghost from his past. When his most prized possession vanished from his table, he didn't hesitate to accuse her, to threaten her entire livelihood. But with her world crumbling, she looked the most powerful man she'd ever met in the eye and spoke 5 words that would change everything. Check the security footage. She thought it would prove her innocence. She never imagined that the very next day, a $500,000 Rolls-Royce would be waiting for her outside her run-down apartment. This isn't a story about a misunderstanding. It's about what the camera saw that no one else did, and how a secret buried for 50 years was about to erupt and change 2 lives forever. The scent of stale coffee and hot grease was the perfume of Clara Jenkins's life. At 22, she moved through the narrow aisles of the daily grind, a diner permanently stuck in a sepia-toned photograph of the 1970s, with the practiced, weary grace of a soldier navigating a familiar trench. Her dreams of charcoal sketches and gallery openings were buried under layers of student loan debt and her mother's mounting medical bills. Each plate of lukewarm eggs Benedict she delivered, each sticky table she wiped down, was a shovelful of dirt on that grave. Her apron, once a crisp white, now bore a Jackson Pollock-esque collection of stains, a dash of ketchup here, a smear of mustard there, a ghostly ring from a coffee cup placed carelessly on her pocket. It was a canvas of her servitude. That Tuesday began like any other. The morning rush was a symphony of clattering plates and shouted orders, conducted by Brenda, the diner's owner, a woman whose heart was as warm as her temper was short. Clara was in the weeds, juggling 3 tables, one of which was the dreaded Booth 4. Booth 4 was the self-proclaimed throne of Mr. Callum Drake. Callum Drake was a ghost who haunted the world of the living. Once a titan of industry, a name whispered with reverence in boardrooms, he had vanished from public life 5 years ago, after the death of his wife Eleanor. Now he was a creature of rigid habit. Every Tuesday and Thursday at precisely 9:00 a.m., his severe black Bentley would pull up to the curb, and he would emerge a tall, gaunt figure dressed in an impeccably tailored but somber suit that seemed to absorb the light around him. He was not a pleasant customer. He demanded his coffee black hot and filled to a specific line just below the brim. His toast had to be the color of pale almond, and his newspaper, the Financial Times, had to be folded crisply beside his plate, not touching it. Any deviation was met with a glacial stare from his pale blue eyes, a look that could curdle cream. Clara, being the most senior waitress, had inherited the honor of serving him. It was a trial by fire, a weekly test of her patience. On this particular Tuesday, the storm broke. A family with 3 sugar-fueled children had just left, leaving a sticky battlefield of syrup and half-eaten pancakes. As Clara rushed to clear the debris, a toddler's discarded toy, a small plastic dinosaur, skittered under her feet. She stumbled, her balance lost for a critical second. The fresh, scalding hot coffee she was carrying for Mr. Drake sloshed violently. A dark, hot wave crested over the rim of the cup and crashed directly onto the pristine pages of the Financial Times. The diner seemed to fall silent. The usual clatter and chatter died, replaced by a thick, anxious quiet. Clara froze the coffee pot still in her hand, her heart hammering against her ribs. Callum Drake slowly lowered the section of the paper he was reading. His eyes, cold as a winter sky, lifted from the spreading brown stain to fix on her. He didn't shout. He didn't raise his voice. He did something far worse. He spoke in a low, venomous whisper that cut through the silence. "Are you an imbecile?" The words struck Clara like a physical blow. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over her. I'm so sorry, sir. It was an accident." "I tripped. An accident," he repeated the words, dripping with disdain. He gestured at the ruined paper with a long, slender finger. "This is not an accident. This is incompetence." Brenda was already rushing over her face, a mixture of apology and apprehension. "Mr. Drake, I am so sorry." "Clara, get a cloth. We'll get you a new coffee, a new paper, right away. On the house, of course." Drake waved a dismissive hand, not even gracing Brenda with a glance. His focus was entirely on Clara, who was dabbing futilely at the soaked paper with a damp rag. "Leave it. It's ruined." He began to gather his things, his movements stiff with anger. He pulled out a slim alligator leather wallet to pay for the coffee he hadn't drunk. He placed a $50 bill on the table, a clear statement of his displeasure. As he stood, his hand brushed against his waistcoat pocket, a gesture he made a dozen times during any meal. Then he froze. His hand patted the pocket again, more frantically this time. His face, already pale, turned ashen. "Where is it?" He breathed, the question directed at the empty space on the table. So Clara asked, her own voice trembling. His head snapped up, and his eyes, now blazing with a terrifying, panicked fire, locked onto hers. "My locket. It's gone." He patted his pockets again, a frantic, desperate search. "It was in my waistcoat pocket. It's always there. It's gone." Brenda stepped forward. "Miss Drake." Perhaps it fell. "Let's look around the booth." But Drake's gaze was cemented on Clara. His mind, conditioned by years of corporate takeovers and hostile negotiations, saw only the most logical, cynical explanation: the clumsy waitress, the distraction, the opportunity. "You," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at her. "You bumped into me. You spilled the coffee as a distraction." Clara recoiled, as if he had slapped her. "What? No, I tripped." "A likely story. A girl like you working in a place like this. You see a man like me. It must be tempting." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The other patrons were now openly staring their breakfasts forgotten. "I am not a thief," Clara said, her voice shaking, but gaining a sliver of steel. The humiliation was hardening into righteous anger. How dare he? How dare he stand there and assassinate her character in front of everyone? It was a silver locket. He pressed on his voice, rising in volume, fueled by a grief and panic that no one in the diner could understand. An antique. It's irreplaceable. "I didn't take your locket, sir." "Then where is it?" he roared, slamming his hand down on the table. The salt and pepper shakers jumped. Brenda tried to intervene again. "Mr. Drake, please let's be reasonable. We can all look for it. Clara has worked for me for 4 years. She's an honest girl." Honest Drake laughed a harsh, ugly sound. "The world is not an honest place. I want you to empty your pockets." This was the ultimate degradation, to be treated like a common criminal. Clara's eyes welled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. She looked past his furious face, past Brenda's worried expression, and up at the small black dome mounted on the ceiling in the corner. The security camera. A spark of defiance ignited within her. Her voice when she spoke was clear and steady, cutting through his tirade. "I will not empty my pockets," she said, her chin held high. "I am not a thief. You want to know what happened to your locket?" She met his furious gaze without flinching. "Check the security footage." The challenge silenced him. His rage was momentarily eclipsed by surprise at her audacity. He stared at her, this insignificant girl in a stained apron who had dared to stand up to him. Brenda, seeing a way to de-escalate, seized the opportunity. "That's a good idea. Mr. Drake, the footage is time-stamped. We can review it right now." But Drake was too proud, too angry to be placated. To him, her defiance was just another confirmation of her guilt. He sneered. "I don't need to check any footage. I know what happened. You're fired." He spat the words directed at Brenda, but his eyes still locked on Clara. "And if my locket is not returned to my office by the end of the day, I will be filing a police report for theft." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the diner, leaving a wake of stunned silence and the lingering smell of burnt coffee and baseless accusation. Clara stood frozen, his threat echoing in her ears. Her job, her reputation, her entire fragile existence was about to be shattered. Brenda put a comforting hand on her shoulder, but it barely registered. All Clara could think about was the cold, indifferent eye of the camera on the ceiling, her only witness and her last hope. "Brenda," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "He can't do that, can he?" Brenda sighed, her expression grim. A man like Callum Drake can do whatever he wants. She gave Clara's shoulder a squeeze. "Go home for the day, sweetie. I'll have to pull the footage. I'll call you." The words hung in the air. "I'll have to pull the footage." A man like Drake didn't make idle threats. Clara was no longer just a waitress. She was a suspect. She walked out of the diner, the stares of the other customers like daggers in her back, and stepped into the grey afternoon, feeling as if the whole world had just found her guilty. Clara's apartment was a small third-floor walk-up that always smelled faintly of her downstairs neighbour's curry. It was her sanctuary, her studio and her cell. The walls were covered in her own charcoal drawings, expressive portraits, sweeping landscapes, studies of light and shadow. They were evidence of a life she was supposed to be living, a constant painful reminder of the dream she was deferring one cup of coffee at a time. She spent the rest of the day in a daze of anxiety. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren in the distance sent a jolt of fear through her. She imagined police officers knocking at her door, the shame of being led away in handcuffs. Her mother. What would this do to her mother? The stress alone could set her recovery back months. She replayed the scene in the diner 100 times, her own voice sounding bold and foreign to her. Check the security footage. Had it been brave or just foolish? What if the camera angle was bad? What if it didn't show anything clearly? What if by some impossible twist of fate the locket had fallen into her apron pocket without her realizing? She frantically checked her hands, trembling, but found only a crumpled napkin and a lip balm. Sleep offered no escape. She tossed and turned, caught in nightmares where Mr. Drake's face morphed into a judge's, his gavel slamming down as he pronounced her guilty. She awoke the next morning to the pale, watery light of dawn, feeling hollowed out. She checked her phone for the 10th time. Nothing from Brenda. That felt ominous. Surely if the footage had cleared her, Brenda would have called immediately. The silence was a confirmation of her worst fears. She was fired. A police report was probably already filed. The name Clara Jenkins was now synonymous with thief. She dragged herself to the small kitchen to make tea. her movements slow and heavy. As the kettle began to whistle, a strange sound from the street below caught her attention. It wasn't the usual rumble of the city waking up. It was a low, powerful purr, a sound so deep and smooth it seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Curiosity piqued. She peered through the grimy window of her living room, and her breath caught in her throat. Parked directly in front of her dilapidated apartment building, a magnificent beast of chrome and steel was a Rolls-Royce Phantom. It wasn't just any Rolls-Royce. It was a stunning, bespoke model, its body, a deep, lustrous midnight blue that seemed to drink the morning light. It was so out of place on her run-down street that it looked like a spaceship had landed. Her neighbors were already starting to gather on the sidewalk, pointing and whispering. Kids on their way to school stopped to stare, their mouths agape. Clara's first thought was that it was a movie shoot. It was the only logical explanation. But there were no cameras, no crew, no barricades. Just the car idling with an almost silent, intimidating power. Then the driver's door opened. A man in a crisp black chauffeur's uniform stepped out. He was tall and impassive, wearing white gloves. He walked not to the front door of the building, but to the passenger side rear door. He opened it with a quiet, reverent click and stood waiting. For whom Clara wondered. The wealthy tech mogul who lived in the newly renovated penthouse down the block. But the chauffeur was looking up, directly at her window. He seemed to have been waiting for her to appear. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Clara's heart began to pound, a frantic, bewildering rhythm. This couldn't be Hua. Bimamwa. It was impossible, a prank, a mistake. Just then her phone buzzed. She snatched it up, her hands shaking. The screen read, Brenda. Brenda. Oh my God, I've been so worried. Did you see the footage? What happened? Brenda's voice was strained, and there was an undercurrent of awe in it that Clara had never heard before. Clara, I saw it. I saw the whole thing. And it shows I didn't take it right. Clara pleaded. It shows everything, honey. It shows a lot more than that. Brenda paused, and Clara could hear her take a deep breath. Mr. Drake called me last night. Very late. He was different, apologetic. I've never heard him sound like that. So he's not pressing charges. Relief washed over Clara, so potent it made her dizzy. Pressing charges, honey. Well, just look outside your window. I am. There's a Rolls-Royce out there. The whole neighborhood is freaking out, Clara Brenda said slowly, enunciating each word carefully. That car is for you. Clara sank onto the arm of her worn-out sofa, the phone nearly slipping from her grasp. That's insane. Why, he wouldn't tell me everything. He just said he was wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. And he said the camera showed him something he had been blind to for years. He wants to see you, Clara. He wants to apologize in person. That car is waiting to take you to his home. Clara stared at the impossible car, at the impassive chauffeur, standing like a statue beside it. This was happening. This was real. Yesterday she was an accused thief on the verge of ruin. Today, a chariot of the gods was waiting at her curb. The two events were so cosmically disparate that they didn't make sense. An apology for a false accusation. A man like Callum Drake didn't send a Rolls-Royce to say, I'm sorry. He might send a check, a curtly worded letter from his lawyer. This This was something else entirely. The camera showed him something he had been blind to for years. Brenda's words echoed in her mind. What could the security camera possibly have shown him? A grainy, black-and-white video of a clumsy waitress and a chaotic diner. It made no sense. Fear and curiosity warred within her. The offer was terrifying. A trip to the lion's den. But what was the alternative? To hide in her apartment, forever wondering to refuse, would be to slam the door on the one thing that could explain the surreal turn her life had just taken. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, she made a decision. She would face the lion. "Tell the driver," she said to Brenda, her voice barely a whisper. "I'll be down in 5 minutes." She hung up the phone and walked to her closet, her mind racing. What do you wear to meet the millionaire who tried to ruin your life and then sent a Rolls-Royce to fetch you? Her wardrobe consisted of jeans, t-shirts, and her waitress uniform. She settled on her one good outfit, a simple black dress she'd bought for a community art show 2 years ago. It was modest and clean. It would have to do. As she walked down the creaking stairs of her building, she felt the eyes of her neighbors on her. Mrs. Gable from 2B, who always complained about her music, peeked out her door, her eyes wide. The kids on the landing fell silent. It was a walk of fame and a walk of shame all at once. She pushed open the front door and stepped into the morning air. The chauffeur, whose name she would learn was Arthur, inclined his head. "Miss Jenkins?" he asked, his voice a polite, low baritone. She nodded, unable to speak. He held the door open for her. She slid on to the plush leather seat, which was softer than her own mattress. The door closed with a silent, satisfying thud, sealing her off from the world she knew. The murmuring of her neighbors, the sounds of the city, all of it vanished, replaced by an opulent, unnerving silence, as the magnificent car pulled away from the curb, as smoothly as a ship leaving port. Clara looked back at her small, insignificant apartment building. She had a strange, powerful feeling that she wasn't just leaving for a meeting. She was leaving a part of her life behind, forever. She was driving into the heart of a mystery, and she was terrified of what she might find. The journey was a silent 20-minute glide through a world Clara had only ever seen in magazines. The gritty urban landscape of her neighborhood dissolved into tree-lined avenues and then into the manicured palatial grandeur of the city's most exclusive enclave. The car turned into a long, winding driveway, hidden from the road by a towering stone wall and a formidable wrought-iron gate that opened silently as they approached. Callum Drake didn't live in a house. He lived in a museum. It was a sprawling Georgian-style mansion of pale stone surrounded by acres of immaculate gardens that looked as though each blade of grass had been individually trimmed. It was beautiful, but it was a lonely beauty. There were no children's toys on the lawn, no signs of life, just a perfect, sterile order. Arthur opened her door and led her up a grand stone staircase to a front door that was at least 12 feet high. It swung open before he could touch it, revealing a stern-looking woman in a grey dress, the housekeeper. "Miss Jenkins," the woman said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Mr. Drake is waiting for you in the West Gallery." Clara followed her through a cavernous foyer with a marble floor and a chandelier that looked like a cascade of frozen diamonds. The air was cool and smelled of lemon polish and old books. Their footsteps echoed the only sound in the vast, silent house. It felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. The West Gallery was a long, sun-drenched room with a wall of glass overlooking the gardens. The other 3 walls were filled with art. but it wasn't the kind of corporate abstract art Clara had expected. These were paintings filled with life and color and emotion. There were vibrant landscapes, intimate still lifes, and powerful portraits. It was a stunning collection. Callum Drake stood at the far end of the gallery, his back to her, staring at a large canvas that hung in a place of honor above a marble fireplace. He was dressed in the same dark suit, but he seemed smaller today, less imposing, without the armor of his anger. He turned as she entered, and for the first time Clara saw something other than cold fury in his eyes. There was exhaustion, regret, and a deep, profound sadness. "Miss Jenkins." "Clara," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you for coming. Please." He gestured to two plush armchairs near the fireplace. She sat stiffly on the edge of the seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The housekeeper vanished as silently as she had appeared. "I imagine you are confused," he began, forgoing the chair and remaining on his feet. "That would be one word for it," Clara replied, her voice steady, despite the hammering of her heart. He gave a small, wry smile that didn't reach his eyes. "First and most importantly, I must offer you my most profound and sincere apology. My behavior yesterday was inexcusable. It was vile. I accused you of something you did not want to do, and I publicly humiliated you. There is no excuse for it, but there is a reason, and I owe you that explanation." He walked over to a small table and picked up a silver object that glinted in the light. "The locket. This belonged to my wife, Eleanor," he said, his voice growing thick with emotion. "She passed away 5 years ago. This locket, it was the first gift I ever bought her when I had nothing. Before all this," he gestured vaguely at the opulent room. "It's the most valuable thing I own. When I thought it was gone..." He trailed off, shaking his head. I reacted out of grief and panic. I saw a target and I lashed out. It was a monstrous thing to do, and I am truly deeply sorry." He placed the locket back on the table. "Brenda suspended you on my instruction. I called her last night and corrected that. Your job is safe, and I have sent the diner a check to compensate for the disturbance and to cover your wages for the next year as a preliminary apology. A year's wages." Clara felt a wave of dizziness. That was more money than she had seen in her entire life. It would pay off a huge chunk of her loans. It would mean she could finally get her mother the better care she needed. "But that's not why I asked you here," he continued, his tone shifting. He turned his gaze back to the large painting above the fireplace. "I asked you here because of what I saw on the security footage." Clara leaned forward. "What did you see? Did you see who took it?" "Oh yes," he said dismissively. "The camera was perfectly clear. As you were tending to another table, one of the busboys, Marco, I believe, saw the locket fall from my pocket when I stood. He covered it with a napkin and pocketed it when he cleared the table. I have dealt with that matter. My security team retrieved the locket from a pawn shop this morning. But that's not what I'm talking about." He paused, taking a deep breath. "My security chief sent the footage to my personal computer. It was high definition, crystal clear. I was looking for the thief. But then I saw you." He pointed a remote at a large screen hidden behind a paneled wall which slid open silently. The security footage flickered to life. There was the diner in grainy but sharp detail. There was Drake himself storming out. And there was Clara standing alone for a moment in the wake of his fury. "Watch," he said softly. On the screen, Clara, looking utterly defeated, leaned against the counter. She pulled a small, worn sketchbook and a piece of charcoal from her apron pocket, a habit she had to sketch during her short, infrequent breaks. For just 30 seconds before Brenda came over, her hand moved across the page, her face a mask of concentration. The camera, positioned almost directly above her, had a clear view of the paper. She was sketching the face of an old man at the counter, capturing his weary expression with a few deft strokes. "My God," Callum whispered, staring at the screen. He wasn't talking to Clara. He was reliving the moment he first saw it. He froze the frame, then zoomed in the image, pixelating slightly. But the details were still clear. The confident lines, the understanding of light and shadow, the raw emotion captured in the sketch. "Your drawing," he said, his voice filled with a strange reverence. "The style, the technique, the soul in it." He turned off the screen and looked at her, his eyes boring into hers. "Where did you learn to draw like that?" Clara was bewildered. This was the big reveal. That he liked her art. I've been drawing my whole life. I took some classes in community college before I had to drop out. Mostly I taught myself. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Someone must have taught you. A parent, a grandparent." Clara frowned. "My father was an accountant. My mother is a nurse. No one in my immediate family is an artist. My grandmother, my mother's mother, she used to draw with me when I was very little. She was the one who gave me my first sketchbook. But she passed away when I was 7. Callum's expression was intense, a complex mixture of hope and fear. "Your grandmother? What was her name?" "Rosemary," Clara said. "Rosemary Jenkins." Callum Drake didn't react, but a subtle tension entered his frame. He turned and walked slowly toward the painting above the fireplace. Clara now saw it properly for the first time. It was a portrait of a beautiful woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a gentle smile. She was seated in a garden bathed in golden light. The style of the painting, the bold brushwork, the emotional depth, the way the light fell was breathtaking and terrifyingly familiar. It was like looking at a fully realized professional version of her own work. The artistic DNA was identical. "This," Callum said, his voice cracking slightly, "is my Eleanor, my late wife. She painted this. It was her last self-portrait before we were married." Clara stood up and walked closer, her heart pounding. She felt a strange connection to the woman in the painting, a ghost of a memory, a whisper of a forgotten song. "Before she met me," Callum continued, his voice heavy with a guilt that seemed ancient. "Eleanor was an artist, a brilliant one. But her family was old money, very traditional. They disapproved. They wanted her to marry well, to be a socialite. When she chose me, I was nobody, then just a brash upstart with more ambition than sense. They gave her an ultimatum. Her art or me." He looked at the painting with infinite sadness. She chose me, and she never painted again. It was the great tragedy of her life, and my greatest regret. He turned back to Clara, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "For 50 years I thought her artistic spirit had died with that choice. I thought it was gone from the world forever. And then yesterday on a security camera, in a greasy spoon diner, I saw it again. I saw her ghost. In your hand. In your sketchbook." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but they were forming a picture so impossible, so earth-shattering that Clara's mind struggled to accept it. Your grandmother Rosemary Callum, said his voice, barely a whisper. Did she ever speak of a sister? An older sister she lost touch with. Clara searched the dusty archives of her childhood memories. Vague images surfaced. Her grandmother, sitting on the porch, sketching in a book, a sad look on her face. A story she once told a very young Clara about having a sister who went away to live in a castle. Clara had always assumed it was a fairy tale. I think so, Clara stammered. She said she had a sister. A long time ago. They had a fight, a family argument. She never saw her again. Callum Drake closed his eyes, and a single tear finally escaped, tracing a path through the weathered lines of his face. Eleanor's maiden name was not Drake, he said, his voice trembling with the weight of a 50-year-old revelation. It was Maxwell, but the name she was born with, the name her estranged younger sister Rosemary would have known her by, was Eleanor Jenkins. The world tilted on its axis. The silent, opulent room seemed to rush in on Clara. Eleanor, Rosemary, Jenkins. The fairy tale was real. The woman in the painting, the brilliant artist, the lost love of this powerful broken man, was her great-aunt. The artistic talent she thought was hers alone was a legacy, an inheritance of the soul passed down from a sister to a sister, and then to that sister's grandchild. The Rolls-Royce, the mansion, the apology. It wasn't about a locket. It was about a ghost. Callum Drake hadn't just found his wife's lost possession. He had found a living, breathing piece of her lost soul. He had found Clara. The revelation hung in the air, as heavy and as fragile as the crystal chandelier above them. Clara sank back into the armchair, her mind a whirlwind. Her grandmother had a sister, a famous, wealthy sister she had never known. The art that flowed from her fingers was a current that had run through her family's hidden history. Callum, meanwhile, seemed to be grappling with his own tidal wave of emotions. He paced the gallery, running a hand through his thinning grey hair. He was a man who had controlled markets, built empires, and bent the world to his will. But he was utterly adrift in the face of this fragile human connection to his past. I need to think. He murmured more to himself than to Clara. This changes things. This changes everything. It was at that moment that a new voice, sharp and laced with aristocratic condescension, cut through the charged atmosphere. Father, what is going on here? My office has been calling you all morning. They said you cancelled the quarterly acquisitions meeting for this. A young man stood in the doorway of the gallery. He was handsome, in a severe, polished way, in his early 30s, with his father's height, but none of his weathered gravitas. He was dressed in a suit that was even more expensive than Callum's, but he wore it like a uniform of entitlement. This was Felix Drake, Callum's only son, and the heir to the Drake empire. Felix's eyes swept the room, taking in his father's dishevelled state and then landing on Clara. He scanned her simple black dress, her worn-out shoes, and his lip curled in a faint, almost imperceptible sneer. He saw a waitress in a palace, and his mind leaped to the most obvious and cynical conclusion. Don't tell me Felix said, a mocking edge to his voice. This is the little thief from the diner I heard about the commotion you caused yesterday. I can't believe you brought her here. Are you paying her off? I hope you're not being too generous. Callum's head snapped up, his grief-stricken demeanour, vanishing in a flash, replaced by a cold fury that Clara recognized from the diner. That is enough, Felix. Enough. Felix scoffed, stepping further into the room. Father, you've been erratic for years, but this is a new level. First, you have a public meltdown over a trinket. Then you send the bloody family Rolls-Royce, the one mother loved, to pick up this girl from some slum. And now you're having tea with her. Have you lost your mind? Is she threatening to go to the papers? Her name is Clara Jenkins. Callum said, his voice dangerously low. And she is a guest in this house. You will show her respect. Respect. Felix laughed, a short, ugly bark. She's a gold digger, father. It's the oldest trick in the book. Cause a scene, play the victim, and then squeeze the guilt-ridden old man for all he's worth. How much does she want? 10,020. Just pay her and get her out of our lives. Clara, who had been sitting in stunned silence, felt a hot surge of anger. The same sense of righteous indignation she'd felt during the accusation in the diner returned tenfold. She stood up, her small frame radiating a surprising intensity. I don't want your money, Mr. Drake, she said, her voice clear and cutting, addressing Felix directly. And for the record, your father invited me here. Felix turned his dismissive gaze on her. Oh, I'm sure he did. My father, since my mother died, has a weakness for lost causes. Felix, I am warning you, Callum thundered. But Clara held up a hand, stopping him. She would fight her own battles. She looked Felix square in the eye. This has nothing to do with money. This is about family. Felix's sneer deepened. Family? Are you claiming to be a long-lost cousin now? The story gets better and better. Let me guess, your sob story is that. Your great-grandfather was a stable boy on the Drake estate. No, Clara said calmly, though her heart was hammering. My grandmother was Rosemary Jenkins. Her sister was Eleanor Jenkins. Your mother. The silence that followed was absolute. Felix's smug expression faltered, his face slackening with disbelief, which quickly curdled back into suspicion. He looked from Clara's defiant face to his father's pained one. That's absurd, Felix stammered. Mother was an only child. No, Callum said, his voice heavy with the weight of old secrets. She wasn't. She had a younger sister, Rosemary. They were estranged long before I met Eleanor. After a terrible argument with their parents, Rosemary left home with nothing. Eleanor was forbidden from contacting her. It was a source of great pain for her, her entire life. Felix stared at his father, his meticulously ordered world beginning to fracture. You never told me. Eleanor made me promise, Callum said sadly. It was too painful for her to speak of. She felt she had abandoned her sister. She chose me, and in doing so she lost her. It was a sin of omission. I am as guilty of as she was. Felix turned his glare back to Clara, his mind now racing to reframe the situation, not as a fairy tale, but as a sophisticated con. This is a lie. A well-researched, despicable lie. How could you possibly prove such a ridiculous claim? The art, Callum said simply. He gestured to Eleanor's self-portrait, and then to the large screen, which still showed the frozen image of Clara's sketch. Look at it, Felix. The line work, the spirit. It's the same. It is a gift passed down through their bloodline. Felix glanced at the images, but his cynicism was a shield, a talented forger, a lucky coincidence. People can be taught to mimic a style. This is a scam, Father. Can't you see it? She found out about some obscure family history perhaps from some old public record, and she's exploiting it. She's playing on your grief. The accusation was poisonous. It sought to twist the most beautiful, miraculous discovery of Callum's recent life into something dirty and calculated. Clara felt a wave of despair. How could she prove it? Her word against his. A family resemblance in art was subjective, not hard evidence. But then a memory surfaced, a concrete object. The sketchbooks, she said suddenly. Callum and Felix both looked at her. My grandmother Clara explained, her mind racing. When she died, my mother packed away a few of her things. I was so young, but I remember a box. It had her old sketchbooks in it. My mother saved them for me. They're in a storage locker. Callum's eyes lit up with a renewed fire. Get them, he said, his voice urgent. Arthur will take you. Whatever you need. Felix let out an exasperated sigh. Father, you are not sending her off in the Rolls-Royce again to fetch some box of mouldy old drawings. This is madness. This is not madness, Felix. This is my one chance to right a 50-year-old wrong. Callum's voice boomed through the gallery, shaking with an intensity Felix had not seen in years. This is for your mother, for Eleanor. While you've been busy building your own little empire on the foundations, I laid you've forgotten what this family was built on. It was built on love, a love that I forced your mother to make a terrible choice for. If this girl, this family is a consequence of that choice, then I will move heaven and earth to make it right. The force of his father's conviction stunned Felix into silence. He saw a passion in Callum that had long been dormant, a fire lit not by a corporate merger, but by a waitress's sketch. It was a power he didn't understand and couldn't control, and it frightened him. Callum turned to Clara, his expression softening. Go, Clara. Please, bring the sketchbooks. As Arthur escorted Clara from the gallery, back through the silent marble halls, she could hear the raised voices of the father and son echoing behind her. How could you be so naive? Felix's voice dripped with contempt. And how could you be so cynical? Callum's voice retorted, full of weary disappointment. You have your mother's eyes, but you have none of her heart. Clara slid back into the plush leather of the Rolls-Royce, the argument fading behind her. The initial shock and wonder of the morning were now tangled with a new, bitter reality. She hadn't just discovered a family. She had walked into a war. Felix Drake would never accept her. He would see her as a threat to his inheritance, to his identity, to the sanitized memory of his mother. The sketchbooks were no longer just a sentimental link to her grandmother. They were now her evidence, her proof of identity. As the great car purred its way back towards her side of the city, Clara prayed that the fragile, pencil-marked pages, stored away in a dark locker for 15 years, held the truth she so desperately needed. The journey to the storage facility was a silent, anxious blur. The imposing luxury of the Rolls-Royce felt utterly surreal parked beside the rows of stark orange garage doors. In the cool, stale air of Unit 3B, amidst the ghosts of her past packed in cardboard, Clara found them. Tucked inside a plastic tote labeled Rosemary's Things were 3 thick leather-bound sketchbooks. Their covers were worn smooth with a lifetime of use. She carried them back to the car, as if they were sacred texts. She was escorted not to the gallery, but to a warm, richly appointed library where a fire crackled in the hearth. The change of setting felt intentional, more intimate. Callum stood waiting by a large mahogany desk, his face etched with a desperate hope. Felix was nowhere to be seen, a small mercy that allowed the tension in Clara's shoulders to ease slightly. "May I?" Callum asked, his voice soft as she placed the sketchbooks on the polished wood. Clara simply nodded her throat, too tight for words. With a reverence usually reserved for priceless artifacts, Callum opened the first volume. He turned the age-yellowed pages, his breath catching audibly. Here was the life his wife's sister had lived, rendered in charcoal and pencil. There were sketches of flowers, portraits of neighbors, studies of her own aging hands. The artistic DNA was undeniable, the same empathy in the lines, the same soulfulness Clara recognized in her great-aunt's work and felt in her own. Callum was seeing the lost years, a talent flourishing in quiet dignity, a world away from his own. "It's her," he whispered, tracing a finger over a self-portrait of an older Rosemary, seeing the faint echo of Eleanor in the woman's kind eyes. He moved to the second book, and then the third, completely absorbed. He was a man, piecing together a family history he never knew he had. Then, near the end of the final book, he froze. His entire body went rigid. "My God," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He turned the sketchbook around for Clara to see. The drawing was of a charming storybook cottage with a rose trellis climbing its front porch. It was the inscription below it, however, in her grandmother's elegant script, that made the air in the room stand still. "Our promise. Our place someday. E and R." Beneath the inscription was an address, Blackwood Cottage, Lakeview Lane, Ambleside. Clara looked at it, utterly bewildered. "I don't understand. What is it?" Callum looked up, his eyes wide with a staggering revelation. "Blackwood Cottage," he said, his voice trembling. "Before Eleanor and I were married, when her family's pressure was unbearable, we secretly bought a small property in her name. A place she could paint, a place where we could be free from them all. She called it our promise place. We planned to run away there if we had to." He pointed a shaking finger at the sketchbook. "That is the cottage. She must have shown a drawing of it to Rosemary. It wasn't just my secret with Eleanor, it was their secret too. A dream they shared. The proof was absolute. It was more than a shared talent. It was a shared secret, a promise immortalized on a yellowed page. No con artist could have known this. It was a message from the past, a truth delivered across a 50-year divide. As this monumental truth settled between them, the library doors swung open. Felix strode in his face a mask of impatient skepticism. "Father, this farce has gone on long enough. Are you still entertaining this girl's fantasies?" Callum didn't answer. He simply turned the open sketchbook around on the desk, his expression one of quiet, unshakable certainty. "Look." Felix marched forward, his gaze falling upon the drawing. He read the inscription. He saw the address. The color drained from his face. His arrogant posture collapsed as if his strings had been cut. "Blackwood Cottage," he whispered. He knew the name. It was a minor asset in his mother's trust, a property he'd always dismissed, never knowing its profound significance. "Your mother's promise place," Callum said softly. A secret she shared with her sister. A secret now passed down to her sister's granddaughter. Felix stared from the irrefutable proof in the book to Clara's dignified face, and then to the tearful conviction in his father's eyes. The intricate web of his cynicism, his arrogant certainty of a scam, was instantly annihilated. He had been wrong, horribly, poisonously wrong. He had guarded a sanitized version of his mother's memory, erasing the very sister whose loss had caused her so much pain. Clara wasn't a threat to his mother's legacy. She was a living, breathing part of it. Shame, hot and sharp, washed over him. He sank into a nearby chair, the proud heir reduced to a humbled son. He began, his voice cracking. He looked directly at Clara, his eyes filled with a genuine, agonizing regret. Miss Jenkins. Clara. I was wrong. What I said, what I thought, it was unforgivable. I am so sorry. The apology hung in the charged silence. Before Clara could even process it, Callum's personal phone buzzed on the desk. He glanced at the ID's head of security. David. He answered, his tone shifting to business. He listened for a moment, his expression hardening into grim lines. I see. No, do not involve the police. I will handle this myself. Thank you. He ended the call, his face a mask of grim contemplation. What is it? Father Felix asked, sensing the sudden shift. Callum's gaze met Clara's. It's about Marco, the busboy. His theft of the locket. It wasn't entirely random. It was personal. He took a deep breath. His father was a foreman at a Drake Industries factory. He was laid off during a restructuring I ordered 15 years ago. The man lost everything. According to my head of security, Marco blames me for his father's subsequent death. He saw the locket fall, and he took it. It was a crime of opportunity, born from a long, festering desire for revenge. The story of the faceless thief was suddenly a tragedy. Marco was collateral damage from a long-forgotten business decision. Another ghost from Callum's past, returning to haunt him. The initial incident was reframed no longer a simple theft, but the desperate act of a wounded son. Callum Drake looked at the sketchbook, at his own humbled son, and at the young woman who was the living key to his past. His life was a ledger of broken connections and unintended consequences. His coldness in business had created an enemy. His demands on his wife had shattered her family. His arrogance in a diner had nearly destroyed the one person who could lead him to redemption. He stood a new resolve solidifying in his eyes. He was no longer just a grieving tycoon. He was a man with a chance to atone. Felix, he said, his voice firm with purpose. We are going to see this young man, not to punish him, to listen, and to help. Then he turned to Clara, his expression softening into one of profound warmth. And you, Clara, you are not a guest here. You are home. This family has a debt to yours that can never truly be repaid. But I will spend the rest of my life trying. He gestured around the magnificent library. This is all just wood and paper. Meaningless. You have brought your great-aunt's spirit back into this house. Now let me help you give your own art to the world. In the firelit library, the three of them were no longer defined by their former roles. They were bound by a complex tapestry of art loss and the improbable, miraculous chance to rebuild. And so a story that began with a spilled coffee and a cruel accusation became a story of redemption. Callum Drake, humbled and changed, didn't just offer Clara money. He offered her a legacy. He established the Eleanor and Rosemary Foundation for the Arts, dedicated to supporting struggling young artists who, like them, had the talent, but not the opportunity. Clara became its first recipient and its guiding voice. Her first solo gallery show featuring her own work alongside the newly discovered paintings of her great-aunt Eleanor was a sensation. Felix's heart opened, became the Foundation's fiercest advocate, using his business acumen to help others instead of just himself. The Rolls-Royce that once waited outside Clara's apartment now serves to bring young, undiscovered artists to the mansion for mentorship. It's no longer a symbol of power, but of possibility. This story reminds us that beneath the surface of our daily lives, there are invisible threads connecting us in ways we can't even imagine. It shows us that a single moment of choice to be cruel or to be curious, to accuse or to investigate, can change the entire trajectory of our lives. It proves that it's never too late to right a wrong, to heal a family, and to apologize not just with words, but with actions that create a better future. What would you have done if you were in Clara's shoes? Or Callum's? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of fate, art, and second chances moved you, please give this video a like. Share it with someone who believes in the magic of hidden connections, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that prove truth is often more incredible than fiction. Thank you for listening.